Good morning, everyone. Today, we're moving ahead in the story of Joseph, Jacob, Judah, and Jesus. We've spent the past few devos in Genesis 40, which is the episode where Joseph is in prison. Remember, his situation has gone from bad to worse in Genesis 39 and 40. And yet, we saw in all of that God's presence with Joseph turned him into a Christ-like man, even during hard and trying times. Today, we're moving on to chapter 41, which still focuses on Joseph. In fact, this is kind of the climax of God's guiding of Joseph's story. All that God has been doing has been to get Joseph to this point, to be the right man in the right place at the right time, to begin to save the family line of Jesus himself. Now, often people look at this part of the story and they teach it as if it was Joseph's big payoff for all of his suffering that he's gone through so far. They see Joseph rise to power and they say, look, God rewarded Joseph for he held on. So God gave him fame and fortune and family. And if you do that, God will do that for you as well. Yet that's a terrible way to teach this story. It assumes that God's work in our lives is somehow to give us our best life now. That's not at all what the Bible teaches us. Our hope should never be in this world. Even when we live faithfully to God, our life will still be hard in this world. In fact, the New Testament teaches us that suffering is part of the Christian life. And the more faithful you are, the harder it will be. It is true that in this part of the story, Joseph goes from the dungeon to the palace, from weakness to incredible power. You all probably know the story. And if you don't, or even if you do, when you get done with this video, go read it. Remember, I don't have time to read all of these chapters. Just the videos would be too long if I did that. But in the meantime, remember, Pharaoh has these dreams predicting there's a famine's coming. But no one can interpret the dreams. And so, after 2 years of leaving him in prison, the cupbearer finally remembers Joseph. And so Pharaoh calls Joseph in, he interprets the dreams, and then he tells Pharaoh that he should get someone to lead a preparation effort for the famine. Pharaoh chooses Joseph. And so he makes Joseph second in command, only to Pharaoh himself. He even gives Joseph a priestess, or the daughter of a priest, as his wife. So this might look like the big payoff for Joseph, for all of his trials that he's suffered so far. Yet Joseph doesn't see it that way. And neither should we. We're going to come back to the beginning part of this episode later on in later devos. Today, I want to take us close to the end of this episode in verses 50 to 52. Look at what Joseph says in these verses. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and my father's house. The second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So Joseph has been in power for a couple of years now, at least, maybe even more. And he's been preparing for the famine, and he has 2 children. Now, the names may seem irrelevant, but look at what Joseph says about those names. He gives them Hebrew names to start out with, which is important, because it shows that he sees himself as a son of Jacob, a Hebrew, not as an Egyptian lord of men. Second, look at their names. Manasseh means forget in Hebrew. And Joseph said that's because God has made him forget all his hardship. Now, it kind of sounds like in our English translations that Joseph is trying to forget his father's house. That's not really a good translation. It would be better if our version said something like, the Lord has made me forget all the hardship that I experienced in my father's house. That is, the abuse of his brothers and all of the hardship that has come as a result of that. This is important because the name shows us that Joseph is choosing not to define himself by his past troubles or his present success, which means the present, he doesn't see that as his big payoff. He's not angry about his past or thinking that he's finally getting what he deserves. Instead, he looks back and he sees God's work in his life so far. The second name is even more important. Ephraim means fruitful in Hebrew. And Joseph says, quote, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. He sees Egypt not as his reward for his trials, but the land of his affliction. he fully rejects Egypt and everything that it has brought to him. With all of his power, with all of his wealth, he's still a slave and he's afflicted. Why? Because even with all this prosperity and authority that he has in Egypt, for Joseph, his heart is in God's promised land. Nothing else will satisfy him. All of that he wants is to go home. But he can't. Everything else is still affliction. No matter all his wealth or power, no matter how successful he is, he wants to be in the promised land. We know this. We see it later on in the story because he tells his children that when they are able to, they must take his bones and bury them back in the land of the promised land, the land of Canaan. Kids, almost every advertisement, TV show, movie, popular song, you name it in our culture, wants us to think that if we can just get enough of X, we will be satisfied here in this world. Yet that's not what God has for us. This world, no matter how good it gets, or no matter how bad it gets, no matter how good it gets, it is always the land of our affliction. The new heavens and the new earth that Jesus has waiting for us is our true home. Let this lockdown of the COVID virus remind you that this world is not your home. Remember that, even when life starts to get better. So you guys think about that, and I'll see you tomorrow.